In my opinion, some of the reasons that small farms fail, and when I say small farms, I mean small farms like homestead farms. So let's say 20 animals or less. One of the biggest things that people don't think about when they get into farming is just how much money everything costs. And everything is stacked against the farmer from the get-go, as far as feed, equipment, supplies, animals themselves. The return that you get on those animals or produce after you've bought them, raised them or it, harvested them or it, and then turned it around completely, the margin's pretty small. Most people who have small homestead farms end up kicking in a lot of their own capital, so you'll find one or both people are working and they do the animals on the side, which in itself presents another problem, because it seems like no matter what it is, it goes wrong when you're not here. Or at night, in the middle of a snowstorm, the list goes on indefinitely. And people say, yeah, I'll deal with it, but when the time comes and the, I don't want to say emergency, but or incidents come up, they find themselves in kind of a predicament often. Don't really get a chance to go on vacation unless you've really got somebody experienced that you can trust to come in and say take care of your dogs and cats and sheep and cows and pigs or whatever. It's a lot bigger commitment than people give it credit for. You know, if you're working 40 hours a week and plus your commute time, etc., and you've got animals on both ends of the day, and people don't understand, or they don't think very thoroughly. They look through the rose-colored glasses like a lot of us do. You know, those animals, they often get sick. The vet lives 3 miles, or the vet clinic is 3 miles from my farm. So she charges $150 just to pull in the driveway. And that's probably standard. I think it's probably $150, and then within a certain range, let's say 10 miles, and they put mileage on top of that because it takes them time. So then when they come out, they've got all the incurred costs of whatever they're doing. So I have been fortunate the last few years. I haven't had to have a vet come out, but there was a couple of years where I had the vet come out probably 3 times a year. And it gets pretty expensive. So if you've got a steer and say she comes out 2 times for something, your profit margin's already pretty thin, and then you have to figure in the veterinary costs. So you might end up taking a loss on that animal, which fortunately I did it. It was pretty close, but I didn't take a loss on it. But a lot of people do. You know, sometimes, and I remember this from being a kid, and I still see it with my family's farms, you know, animals are unpredictable. They get themselves into predicaments or binds that they didn't plan on, obviously. I happened to go down back one time. My milk cow she had gone over the stone wall and she was kind of tangled up in the fence. And she didn't flail around, she just kind of laid there until I found her, then I got her out. But that's best case scenario, you know. A lot of times people go down, they find their animal all tangled up in barbed wire or cut up or whatever. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong. And if they do go wrong, are you capable of going and getting your weapon, your gun, whatever it is? I use a 30-30, a 22, or a shotgun, and I have to go shoot those animals. It's very infrequent, but I've had to shoot 3 animals here. So unless you're one of those people, it's tough for me, and I'm a veteran. I've been to a couple wars, so it's traumatic for me. Anyway, yeah, if you can't, your animal's suffering and you need to put it down, are you able to go get a gun and look that animal in the eye and then pull the trigger and then dispose of it? So this time of year, that means strapping it to the bucket of your tractor and hauling it down back and dumping it over the stone wall and waiting for the coyotes to eat it. And I know that sounds very traumatic, it sounds very extreme, but that's pretty much what happens. You can't dig a hole, it's frozen, so what are you going to do? You can't have the vet put the animal down because the poison that they used to put the animal down, you still have the animal laying out there on the ground. The vet's not going to take your animal away generally. So if they put that poison in the animal to kill it, well, since something comes and eats the carcass, they get killed also. So it's kind of one of those things, and people don't think of that. And you know, I get very emotional when I have to do that. It's not something I enjoy. But if you're not willing to do that, you might want to think again. You know, a lot of people, they didn't grow up around animals or farming or equipment. I grew up with equipment and machinery, and I was in the Seabees, so I used that a lot. I also was in electronics in the military, so I learned how to do a lot of things with electricity. But people buy machinery and they don't have the experience on how to use it, and then they get themselves hurt or killed. They just don't think. And people say, well, they didn't use common sense. Well, it's not necessarily common sense. They just didn't know. You know, I don't see, sometimes the farmers, future farmers of America have like tractor safety classes, but you don't see that too frequently outside of like a big rural community. And the dealers don't typically show you very much about buying tractors. I bought a lot of tractors, and I don't think I got 30 minutes of instruction in 52 years of my life. So yeah, people get the manuals, but they don't read them. And they pretty much don't ever read the manuals. They lose them, and then something goes wrong, and then you just don't know what to do. It's not instinctual. If your tractor's starting to go over, push the joystick forward and drop your bucket, or there's just a lot of things that people don't think, and they panic or freeze, which could be either one, could be detrimental. So they don't know how to use the equipment, which is not any fault of theirs, other than the fact that they just didn't know. Machinery is expensive, and you're going to find yourself, you're going to need different things. And as you get older, you'll find a lot of times that something mechanical will take the place of something you used to do manually, and that allows you to maintain your status of farming, but it costs money. And to coincide with that, you have to know plumbing. There's always something wrong with plumbing. Either adding something, and the same with electricity, either adding something or something that just doesn't work. It could be an outlet is dead. You want to add an outlet for a heated water bucket, or you're putting a shed on, you want to put some outlets in there and some lights, or you just don't have a big enough breaker for that amount of stuff that you have, so you have to put a bigger breaker in. There's a lot of things that people just don't think about. And the same goes with plumbing. Maybe you don't have plumbing in your barn, but maybe you have a hydrant. Are you able to take the hydrant out and put the hydrant back in, dig a trench across your driveway to install a hydrant? And if you do have plumbing in your barn, like I'm fortunate enough to do, you're able to make repairs and make changes as necessary. I could keep going with this carpentry is something that the cows are very, very hard on buildings and machinery. They break stuff all the time. That I'm talking about. Can you do quality carpentry that is going to be safe and reliable and not look like crap? People sometimes they do stuff, and I'm guilty of this myself. Sometimes it's the farmer get it done because you didn't have enough time. And my wife always says, you don't have time to do it right the first time, but you got plenty of time to come back later and do it right. And yeah, that's probably pretty much true, because when I didn't do it right the first time, it's because I was in the middle of something else, like haying, and I just had to make it work. But then I have to come back later and fix it. And I say that because at some point you're going to want to sell the place, and if looks like a fourth grade kid went out there and put it together, you're going to have a hard time selling it, or it's going to cost you a lot of money to go get it fixed right. In a lot of municipalities, it's okay for the homeowner to do their own plumbing and electrical, but when they go to sell the place and they have an inspection done, it may not pass, so you might have to have somebody come back and redo it. So there's a lot of things that people don't think of. And mechanical, even you can go buy a brand new tractor and you still might have an issue with it. You might have something. So you're able to do basic troubleshooting and fix machinery. A lot of the older machinery doesn't even have safety features on it, so it's even more dangerous. But it does take a lot of time. And I'm retired almost 6 years now, 7 years from the military, so I'm pretty much here all the time. And this is what keeps me sane. But if you don't have that flexibility to be around your farm all the time, having a small farm is very difficult, because there's just always something to do, there's always something broken, there's always something going on. And if you market your products, you have to take some time to put your stuff together and figure out what you're going to cost, what you're going to charge, and where to sell it. Get some customers. I direct sell beef to customers, so I have to make sure I have customers lined up, because if I have 3 cows going in August, I want to make sure I've got 3 people ready to buy, make sure those animals are all going to be accounted for. I don't want to send them to the butcher shop and have 750 pounds of meat with no place to put it. And that goes into another whole issue. What I do is I do custom meat, so I sell the animal to the person and they go to the butcher shop and pick it up. I don't ever handle the meat. The last time I touch the animal is when I drop it off. But if you want to sell it at your house, well, now that invokes another whole level of bureaucracy, because they come out and inspect your house, they inspect your freezers. If you want to sell vegetables and jams and jellies, they inspect your kitchen, and there's a fee for everything. And then they can just say, hey, I'm coming over tomorrow, I'm going to come check out your kitchen. So it's a lot of things that people don't think about. Yeah, there's always people who are just doing it anyway, and they're just selling it out of their freezer and selling it out of their kitchen, and that's all fine and good until something goes wrong. And we're in a litigious society now, and people love to sue. It's a risk. When I first got out of the military, I was here, and my kids had some counselors. And I told the counselors, and I told the counselor's boss, don't go on the pasture because it's breeding season for the sheep, and the male is pretty aggressive. So, a few weeks later, I was out back, I was on the roof of one of my buildings, and I saw the counselor go out there with my son. And she got knocked down by the ram. So she said she was okay, and okay, don't go out there. I got a call that night from her daughter that said she had gone to the hospital with a traumatic brain injury, and then I got sued for $475,000 that my insurance paid out, and then they dropped me. So then I had to go find another insurance company, and all the potential insurance companies I looked at said, oh, you had a catastrophic loss, did your house burn down? I said no, and I explained it, and they're like, oh, yeah, well, maybe you can help find somebody else. So ultimately I was able to find an insurance company that would cover the farm, but people don't understand that your homeowner's insurance and your farm may not necessarily go together. So you may have to have another whole level of insurance, which also goes into a limited liability company, LLC.
So dealing with death on the farm is something that's always right there in the future. It's always right there. It's always lurking in the shadows. Sometimes you'll come out and something will just be dead, and you don't even know why. I've had animals that just came out and they were just dead, and you're just like, I don't even know what happened here. This is devastating. From a financial standpoint, yeah, okay, but from an emotional standpoint, it's really tough to deal with it. Especially if you've got a cow that fell down a stupid well that was covered, but they got on. I had this one instance where there was an old well down back, it had a cover on it, but some water built up on top of the cover. A sheep got up there to drink the water, and the cow was like, oh, that's a good idea. So the cow got up on there, they collapsed the cover, and they both drowned in the well. Well, I've since filled the well in, and that's just something that's so stupid. Kids leaving the grain room door open, and a sheep getting in there and eating too much grain. So you give CDT to your animals, but if they eat too much grain, because CDT is a vaccine for not only tetanus, but for overeating like grain and things, but it still can be devastating for an animal to eat too much grain. But sometimes you'll just come out and an animal will be dead and you have no idea what happened. There's no clues, there's nothing. But it's still, from any kind of standpoint, financial or emotional, it's really tough to come out and find one of your animals gone. So let's see, what else? I've talked about money, but one of the things about money is equipment. It seems like there's always one more thing you need, and most of the time you can get by, you can jury rig it, you can do whatever, but a lot of times you get stuff because it's labor saving, especially now that I'm going to be 52 years old. I've got a disability, many disabilities actually from being in a couple wars, and my kids are gone, so labor saving. I buy things that are labor saving, so it's a little bit less back breaking. I'm not going to quit because the exercise is good for me, and emotionally it's good. So, but one of the other things, talking about emotionally, you know that probably equal to veterans killing themselves is farmers killing themselves, and you see it all the time, and it's depression. They get depressed, like they sometimes, when I saw that nobody in my family killed themselves, but my sister and brother-in-law had a dairy farm, and the market just collapsed, absolutely collapsed. And so they had payments, they had grain payments, they had machinery payments, whatever else. And then you're selling your milk for less money than it costs you to make it. I don't know how. So some people will say, well, the reason this farm failed is because they didn't buy the latest technology. Well, if you can't afford the latest technology, you don't want to go take out a loan to buy the latest technology. And a lot of people who bought the latest technology ended up, they still lost their shirt, and then they killed themselves because they just financially couldn't, or emotionally, mentally just couldn't handle it. So Some people will say that the farms fail because they didn't buy the latest technology. Well, I disagree 100%. I think they might often fail because they did buy the latest technology. There's just so many things that people don't take into consideration. They see beautiful sunset, a nice red barn with a silo, a white house with a porch, and some animals out in their pasture. And there's a lot of times in the summer when I'm sitting on my back patio, and that's exactly what I see, and I love it, okay? But there's a lot of days that that's not one. Now, there's a lot of factors of why farms fail, and I'm only going to tell you a few. But the last one I'm going to tell you is that farmers are often the worst businessmen, business people, businesswomen, whatever. And I see this all the time, is a farmer has a product, and they're selling it for what it costs, maybe a little bit more, obviously, product or raising the product. And then somebody else comes in behind them, and they undercut them because they think that they're going to make more customers or a better deal. Well, pretty soon that person who came in and undercut the first guy realizes that they can't sustain that, so they've got this price low. Now they have to raise their price, okay, and that makes their customers upset because they raised their price, and the customers are like, I don't know what just happened. And then somebody else will come in behind that person and make the same mistake over and over and over again, and farmers just don't charge enough money for what it costs to grow your product. So if it costs you $6 a pound to grow your cow, don't sell it for $5.50, you know, unless you're just doing it for charity work, which that doesn't make any sense, but some people do, okay. The most common thing that I see people complaining about is eggs. And it's one of those things that most farmers will sell eggs, and a lot of times they sell them as a value-added product, so they don't always charge what they're worth, or they kind of throw them in sometimes. But there's a lot of people out there who just don't do the math. They don't realize how much it costs to actually grow a chicken to the age to lay an egg, how much it costs to sustain that chicken, and then sell the eggs. So if it costs you $4.50 a dozen to grow the chicken, and I've already done the math a million times, and I've got a video on this too. If it costs you $4.50 a dozen to keep the chicken, and then you're selling your eggs for $2.50 or $3 a dozen, that doesn't make any sense. It's financially stupid. But you see that all the time. So one of the reasons that small farms fail is because they don't charge what it really costs for their product. They've got a terrible business analysis. They didn't come up with a business plan, or they're just trying to like get all the business. Well, you can have all the business in the world selling stuff for less than it costs you to make it, but you're not going to be able to sustain that unless you're kicking in your own capital. So don't do that. It's one of the dumbest things you can do.
But I hope this video has been helpful, and there's a lot of videos out there about things to think about before you become a farmer, and people take stuff into consideration. But there's a lot of stuff that people don't talk about, and the hardest things are what I've just discussed, and primarily it's sick animals and shooting them. And nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about what do you do when you get old and you still have the farm and you don't want to sell it. It's just a lot of things that people don't talk about. So I hope this has been helpful to you, and I'll talk to you next time.